This episode of Around the Layout is powered by Rapido Trains.
Buying Rapido trains will make you happy.
Rapido's going back to the 90s for the return of the Mac. SD70 Macs in both HO and N scale in variations you've never seen before. Whether it's coal or racks, you need a 70 Mac. Check out all of the details at rapidotrains.com. Around the Layout podcast is heading to Chattanooga for the 2026 National Train Show, appearing in conjunction with Spring Creek Model Trains. Come check out everything Spring Creek has to offer, from the latest releases to the wide selection of models, supplies, and outstanding service that make them a favorite across the hobby. Whether in Deschler, Nebraska, Chattanooga, Tennessee, or at train shows coast to coast, stop in and say wow. Meet me in St. Louis for the largest annual RPM event in the U.S., July 23rd through the 25th. For more info, head to stlrpm.com. We're giving away a hard-sided storage and transport case from modeltrainbox.com. Subscribe to ATLP Extra by July 9th for your chance to win at atlpextra.com. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott, so glad you could join us. On this episode, we'll be talking about family, persistence, prototype research, and continuous learning from a gentleman I had the good fortune to meet in person at the Sydney RPM, and now he's here to share his story. Welcome, John Arrowsmith. Good to see you again, John.
Thank you, Ray.
We had a lot of fun at Sydney RPM, although you and I didn't get a chance to really spend a whole lot of time together. But I know you got to share a lot of your work and spend quite a bit of time with folks and talking super detailing. And I'm looking forward to getting into that part of the story with you. But it was a great event, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. I think for the first RPM in Sydney, Justin put in a terrific effort. And I think it really showed the high quality level of modelling that goes on here in Sydney and within the Australian modelling scene.
Yeah, it was very impressive. Some amazing modelers, including yourself, that brought models and shared them with everyone who attended. And I know I left flying home with my flywheel turning, and I'm sure your flywheel was spinning pretty fast as well, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. I as a modeler, I always look to see what other modelers are doing and how I can model better from looking at other people's work. And it was very impressive. The levels of modelling was very, very high standard. And I've got to say, I came home after that event and have taken a whole lot of notes of how I can improve my own models from that.
Yeah, it's definitely a great place to learn from each other and share our stories. And that's what we're here to do as well. We're here to share your modeling story, get to know you a little bit, an Australian modeler with a passion for North American railroading in the 1950s. We're going to get into all of that. But before we get to Santa Fe, Arizona and the big layout, take us back to Balcombe Hills. What was your first memory of trains?
Okay, my first memory of trains was when I was 3 years old. My grandfather had made me a wooden train for Christmas. And this was a ride on wooden train. For a 3-year-old, that was very exciting, with all bright colours and represented the old steam trains that you used to see running around Sydney back in the 60s and early 70s. My grandfather, he used to work on the railways back in the day, and he was a carpenter. So, yeah, it was fascinating. There was a tank engine, a coal car, a stock car, a tank car, and a red caboose. The stock car and the caboose even had opening doors on it, and all the cars were painted in bright colours and silver roofs and so on.
He spent a lot of time on that. That's a pretty wild detail that he put into it.
Yes, It was. Yes.
Do you still have it?
Unfortunately not. But that to say, it's not going to stop me making a wooden train for my grandkids one day.
There you go. Yeah, kind of keep that tradition going, right?
Yes.
Yeah, that's a pretty fun, and pass it along. Yeah, that's pretty phenomenal. So you get this wooden train. When does model railroading kind of kick in as a kid?
When I was about 7 years old was my introduction to model trains. Mum and Dad bought me an HO scale Tyco train set that came with a little yellow Queensland Railways diesel, a 40-foot Swift Reefer, a 60-foot Star-Kissed boxcar, and a Queensland Railways caboose. That Christmas, Dad had also built me a 4x8 layout with an oval of track, a tunnel, roads, a bridge over a lake, a homemade road bridge, and a station he had also made from balsa wood, and a couple of Hornby model buildings, a service station and a corner shop. The layout was made of chipboard on a light pine frame and was mounted on a pulley system in the garage. That way I could lower it down when Dad had the car out. And eventually that layout grew to 2 ovals and a siding, then a horseshoe around the outside of that I had a little tram running around, and of course more buildings and more trains. So following Christmas came my first Santa Fe locomotive, which was a Tyco bookend scheme GP20, and 3 Tyco Amtrak passenger cars. So eventually I learned of much better locomotives, and with my introduction to Athearn, Blue Box models, and then Atlas and Proto, I saved my pocket money to buy more freight cars, and by 16 my collection had swelled quite considerably.
When you mentioned that your dad was helping you with these buildings and stuff, he was obviously model railroading, but would you consider him at heart a model railroader? Was he into it as much as you were?
No, not really. But Dad's passion was pattern making. He was a pattern maker by trade, so his detail was extraordinary. And yeah, he was very good at model making, very good at making dies for casting and that sort of thing.
So
But
he had that skill set for sure, and he
yes,
was able to help it by applying it to your layout. To me, it's very fascinating, and credit to him to show that much interest and that much passion to get involved, even though he's not really into model railroading. He knew you were, and he knew he had a skill that would help you along your way and pass that on. That's really a cool thing.
yeah, oh, absolutely.
So you mentioned American model railroad. Now talk about your influence of American railroading on with starting really with the model, right? Is that where it started? It wasn't from the prototype; it was from the model.
It was from the model, that's right. And with what was available back in the day here in Australia, today we're blessed with, companies that are producing diesels, passenger and freight cars in molded styrene for a very good price and good quality products. But back then you were very limited. You had either brass or resin casting in Australian made stuff. But for ready to run, which as a 7-year-old is what you're looking for, something you can just run around the track straight away. You had products like your Tyco and your Athearn and Hornby that were available off the shelf at the hobby shop. And I guess what got me was that the blue and gold of the Santa Fe. I thought that looked so cool. When I saw that diesel in the window, that's what Mum ended up getting me for Christmas that year.
When you see, I mean, obviously you mentioned that the color is what drew you to the Santa Fe.
Yeah.
When do you actually start to wonder and start to dig in more as to beyond the color, and you start to learn about what the Santa Fe actually is and what the Santa Fe means?
So I guess when I was in my teens, I started collecting the Model Railroader magazine. My grandmother had also given me the Encyclopedia of Model Railways, which a lot of young fellas got in the 1970s, and that had a lot of different skill sets that I learned from those books and magazines. And of course, looking at other American layouts in those. And then I thought the Santa Fe is really quite appealing because of the way it grew. I was looking at the history of it. I was looking at the different types of locomotives and rolling stock that ran over the Santa Fe. And then in the late 90s, there was this magazine, Great Model Railroads, that had Chuck Hitchcock's layout in it, and that got me, where you had, of course, the war bonnet diesels, the steam, and the passenger trains. And I guess I've always had a bit of a thing for passenger trains more than freight. That was my thing. I quite enjoyed watching the streamline locomotives and passenger trains from the 50s era. In time, I eventually went back to the 50s era and started modelling the 50s instead of the 70s and 80s with the blue and gold. I moved back to the war bonnet era.
Talk about that transition. You go from the 70s back to the 50s, and you're influenced. What was the real big appeal of that? Was it steam? What was the real driving force behind that change?
It was a number of things. I really enjoyed the look of the early diesels because they are also very similar to a lot of the Australian diesels we had here around the time, with that streamlined look about the nose of them and so on, the war bonnet look, but also the steam engines that the Santa Fe had in the US. I quite admired how they modified them and how they transitioned from the steam to the diesel era. That gave me the opportunity to model both steam and diesel, have the streamlined passenger trains, but also open up into the heavyweight cars just before they ended up being phased out.
I want to go back here to your influence of Chuck Hitchcock's Argentine layout. When you looked at Chuck Hitchcock's layout, what were some of the things that were like you must have, like those the things that you really of that layout that you really wanted to be able to incorporate in yours?
What he was displaying there was the ability to run trains to like a timetable. He had the name trains there. So you had the Super Chief, the Chief, the El Capitan, California Limited. I learned about the Fast Mail and its operations. And I thought, well, that's a different type of switching. You know, that's not just freight cars, it's dropping off express cars and this sort of thing. Looking at how the Santa Fe ran its timetables through, what was different about the passenger train from when it left Chicago to when it arrived in LA, and how the train could have completely changed, particularly in like trains like the California Limited and the Grand Canyon, where they dropped off numerous cars and added numerous cars along that journey. I also liked his detail. So he went to quite a bit of detail in how he had his cars connecting together with things like diaphragms so that they wouldn't tear off the track and that sort of thing. He'd gone to a fair bit of trouble, and using his experience, I then grew that for my layout in the future. His detail with his track and structures and so forth was also quite fascinating.
We're changing the era that you're modeling. How did that affect your layout?
Right. Well, back in those days, I had two little boys who were under 10, and that first layout that I had in that particular house was in a spare bedroom, and it was basically a circle around the bedroom with a yard on one side and scenery on the other. And I had early Amtrak trains running. I had Santa Fe freight running through. And then in the early 2000s, BLI produced this locomotive 3751. And I looked at this thing, and my one of my good friends there pointed it out to me. He said, "Oh, John, you got to see this. Look at how this has the detail in it. It's got sound." And I thought, wow, that's cool. So Matt encouraged me, and here I am with 3751 as my first decent steam locomotive. And after looking at this and getting a few heavyweight cars to pull for it to pull. I thought, no, this is where I want to go. This, and with the research from Chuck's magazine and elsewhere, I thought, no, this is where the change is going to be. So I ended up selling off all of my 1970s and 80s stuff, and that financed the beginnings of my 1950s modelling. Went from one steam engine to where we are today, where there's nearly 80 steam engines in the.
You've been busy. You've been busy.
Just a bit. Yeah.
You talk about that first unit with sound and the evolution of DCC, and I know you've really taken on that. Talk about the evolution of technology in your model railroading and how you've enjoyed that process.
Well, I guess I should start with my background, which is a computer engineer. So that's my day job. So it's always struck me with the technology of DCC, of how cool that technology is in model railroading. And I transitioned in the early 2000s from DC to DCC with that same layout that was in the spare bedroom. That was like the test bed. And I had a lot of trial and error with it to begin with because I was new to it. I'd done only a little bit of research. I found out a lot more about it once I had joined up with the NMRA and met a few folks like David North, who also was into DCC, and they had a SIG group out at Kellyville that I used to go and visit quite often. And I made the decision to move into the NCE DCC platform, which I felt was a good, solid state, stable platform to work with that I could see had the potential to grow. So that's the path I took. I started with non-sound decoders in a few locomotives and then eventually into the sound. And as we talked, the 3751 had one of the first sound steam locomotives with the quantum sound that back then sounded awesome for the time. And I guess with DCC, the big difference is that you're actually controlling your train, you're not controlling the layout. Right. And that was also a big transition, is that all of a sudden you're in control of the train. You are the driver or the engineer. And that really transformed things, particularly when you start building bigger layouts and so on.
I mean, just the fact that, for the years of running them silent and not having that, and all of a sudden there's sound. I mean, this thing's alive, the realism starts to notch up, and, all that other modeling that you're doing around it just seems to look that much better because all the senses are being used, aren't they?
Oh, that's right. So I guess with your first DCC that was silent, the big thing was not just controlling your train, but having the ability to turn lights on and off. That was huge compared to DC. And then the transition to sound, you've suddenly got bells, whistles, chuffing, brake squeal. It was awesome. And today we've gone that step further, where with decoders like your new ESU number 5s, you can program the sounds in. And that has been quite fascinating, and I've given that a good go. That 3751 locomotive now has an ESU decoder in it with recorded sounds from the prototype. And I guess I went down that rabbit hole and learned all about how to cut wave files after I've imported them from a DVD and then transported them into this little decoder.
So you've gone all in on DCC, and one of the names that you mentioned was David North, and I had the pleasure of meeting David as well and had a fantastic conversation with him regarding DCC and, of course, ESU loc sound programming, and just a great conversation with him. And I'm sure learning together and having somebody like that, certainly it had to have helped you walk down that path, didn't it?
Oh, absolutely. So I guess I should talk about when I first met David and how I ended up joining the NMRA as a result of David. And that was again in the early 2000s. One of my favourite hobby shops was in West Ryde, and that happened to be David's favourite hobby shop. And here we are meeting up at the counter, and he saw me buying a whole lot of Santa Fe bits and bobs, and we got talking. And then he tells me that he modelled Santa Fe as well, and anyway, we exchanged numbers, and he invited me down to the special interest group out at Kellyville, and we've been great mates ever since. And I've learnt an incredible amount of modelling detail and ideas, and I've got to credit David for a lot of the things that I've learned in regards to the Santa Fe Railway.
That hobby shop really was the very first Facebook group, wasn't it? It was where everybody kind of came together, met, and shared ideas. It was so important back then without, the full on social media that we enjoy now, where we can connect with people all over the world. It used to be go in the hobby shop, start a conversation, and that shopkeep was like kind of the hub of everything, right? They kind of knew the guy that knew a guy, and because they had so many of the customer base and started to talk and learn them. And I still think it is in a lot of ways a great place to go and conversate. And for you, it pays off with this new relationship with David North.
Oh, absolutely. I do a lot of computer work for one of the hobby stores in Parramatta, Berg's Hobbies, and Peter and I will sit there for hours talking trains. And he's a long-time modeller, as was his father before him, and I think that shop's been running for over 50 years. And that you do meet other modelers in the store while you're busy there. And I think it's a great outlet to learn and discover new things.
You talk about meeting some new friends with David North, and how about the relationship with the layout and your model railroading and your two boys under 10? Do your boys get into this model railroading thing?
Oh, yes, absolutely. And they still have the bug. In fact, just last weekend, my then under 10-year-old, who's now 23, came especially on Sunday just to spend time in the layout room. And we spent the entire afternoon just switching cars and, shooting the breeze. It was great. And tomorrow, in fact, we've got an operating session on the layout, and my other younger son, who's now 19, is coming along for the day with all the other guys I have for the ops meet. So yes, they've got the bug well and truly, and thoroughly enjoy model railroading. It's a great bonding session between me and the boys. It's a learning session. And in the big layout that's in the garage at the moment, during COVID, when I say learning session, it was an educational session for them as well, because they couldn't go to school with COVID. I couldn't go to work much with COVID. So we built a layout, and yeah, they learned all about Pythagoras with hands-on.
There you go. Yeah. Getting some firsthand education on it. As they've developed through the hobby, and of course this period of COVID when you guys are super focused on building it, did they each develop their own unique passions for it? Were there certain aspects that either one was really drilled in on?
Yes, they did. So Daniel, my oldest boy, he was very much into track laying. He had a lot to do with our building of our helixes on the layout, and the big S bends and reversing loops that we have on the layout, working out all the calculations for it. Ben is very much into scenery. He enjoys working with his hands, and quite a few detailed sections on the layout, particularly around yucca. He put a fair bit into the scenery. So yes, that's his cup of tea. He loves getting his hands into the paper mache and getting it the shape of the contours into the layout.
With them now, the youngest 19, and you mentioned the oldest in his 20s. and
Yes.
they're out doing their own things and, having their own life now. Must be special for you to look around that layout and have memories of them on it.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. And no, they've both got their own trains that they bring along as well. So we get to run not just my trains on the layout, but Daniel in particular. He's got a bit of a project going on at the moment where he's putting together a brass super chief. So he's been collecting brass cars from all over the world, and we've been modifying those together. And at the moment, he's looking for another F unit so that he can get a decent 4-unit set that matches correctly. And then we'll paint and detail it all. And we've been putting all the perspex in the windows and lighting them all up and replacing all the trucks and so that they're all standardized and doing all the couplers and working out all the diaphragms and so on. He's getting a lot of enjoyment out of that. Ben, he enjoys the scene, as I said, the scenery side, but he also enjoys operating. So hence he's coming tomorrow for the operating session. It's great. It really is. It's great.
Back to your progression here, we talked about just picking a railroad based on color, and then now you're really focusing in, learning more about the Santa Fe, influenced by Chuck Hitchcock and all the things that you're starting to learn. You rewind it back to the 1952 to 1954 era. Now you start to drill in on a prototype area. Talk about the idea of the first Arizona subdivision and why you locked in on that. What drew you specifically to that area to model?
I guess from Chuck's influence, I got hooked on the name trains that the Santa Fe used to run during that period. So I was looking for an area on the Santa Fe where the majority of those trains would run through. During that period of research, I joined the Santa Fe Historical and Modelling Society and subscribed to their War Bonnet quarterly magazine. And one of the, I think it was the 1998 third or fourth quarter, had a write-up on the first Arizona subdivision. And I thought, this is it. This has everything, every aspect about model railroading that I'm interested in. It has the main line where these passenger trains used to run through. It had, of course, mainline freights, a reasonable amount of freight switching as well. And the area was also something that I haven't seen a lot of modelers actually model. It was different. A lot of the Santa Fe modelers, they model Cajon Pass or they model San Bernardino or Chicago, Dearborn Station, that sort of thing. But Arizona sort of gets left out. I thought, well, there's something different. And that's where I went. I went down that idea and I looked at the different towns. I did research on all the different towns, found out what types of freight services and passenger services the town utilised and so on. And I then formulated the first version of the first Arizona sub from that.
Tell us about that first build and what you learned from that build that's taken you to the next one.
Well, the first build, that was in an attic in the house that we were in at the time. It was a would have been 9 metres by about 15 metres area, so that's quite reasonable size. Had a peninsula down the middle. One of the first things I learned about is to fit everything in, you needed space. And I wanted to model several towns, have enough room for switching, but also have enough room for the larger passenger trains to run through. The biggest problem that layout had is that you had quite a steep grade from level 1 to level 2. And even though I used an entire length of the layout to achieve that grade, it was too steep, and that produced a whole lot of problems. So hence the current layout, I've used a helix to get from levels 1 and 2, and then another helix from levels 2 to 3. And that has proven much more satisfactory. You very rarely get runaways, very rarely get derailments from the helix compared to the constant grade. The other problem the constant grade had was that it left you with a limited amount of area for actual switching, where you needed flat ground to uncouple a car without it running off on you. So it, you didn't need those problems. So yeah, it also taught me a whole lot of different modelling techniques. It taught me a whole lot more about DCC when I was wiring that up. And the kids and I had a lot of fun. They were quite young when we did that first layout. And it was our little getaway. We could just climb up into the attic and spend the day in there and have a lot of fun. But at the end of the day, it grew old. It proved a whole lot of things I needed to change, and hence the new layout in the new place.
Can you actually pinpoint the moment when you said enough with this and I got to start over? Was there a particular moment in your mind, or that wake up one morning and have that? Did you have the had enough moment?
It was actually forced upon me, and that was called divorce.
Well, I guess that is a had enough moment, isn't it, John? Yeah. Of a totally different type, which is a whole different podcast, but yeah.
Yeah, it is. So
Okay.
Look, I ended up buying this new place because of that, and made the decision that we'll start from scratch. Best thing I ever did is get out of that situation, and it left a place for me, and when the boys come along, somewhere that was a different outlook altogether. Living in the mountains here, you walk out on the deck, you've got a view right across Sydney and beyond. And one of the things that when I bought this place is it needed a big shed for a layout. So we had a big shed for a layout.
Nice.
And so the layout shed is the size of a double car garage now. Yeah, and it was something that the boys and I could just work on together when they were around, and that was great.
Talk about developing the plan for this. You've got a big area. You describe it as a 16 by 20 garage, two car garage. You've got a lot of space. I'm sure you had a lot of ideas. Talk about putting that plan together.
Yes, that was the challenge. So the garage still needed to be functional as a bit of a workshop. And at the same time, we were looking at how we're going to build this layout to fit in everything we wanted to fit in. So the boys and I sat around and worked it all out. Our layout design we ended up doing on the back of Christmas paper, because your Christmas paper roll is fabulous because it's about the right width, and you can roll it right out and join bits and bobs together, and you can put all your track on it and work it out with the layout in 1-to-1. So we did do that. We had all the Christmas paper laid out on the floor and in the garage, and worked out, okay, what towns can we fit? There were two essentials. One was the town of Needles, which is in California, and of course the city of Kingman in Arizona. They were the two major towns we'd like to fit. The options we would have liked to fit were Hackberry and Yucca, and if we could, Seligman, and we also needed staging. So what we ended up being able to fit is staging, which we nicknamed Barstow Staging. It's on level 1 of the layout. From there you go up to level 2, and we've got the City of Needles, then Topock Bridge, which is one of the highlights for scenery, then the town of Yucca, then up the helix into level 3, where we have the City of Needles, the town of Hackberry, and we squeezed in a little bit of Nelson And Nelson was important because on that area of the division, one of the biggest industries was the Grand Canyon Limestone and Cement Company, and we wanted to fit that in. And so that's down one entire side of the layout. It was a compromise that meant that we couldn't put Seligman in as the end of the subdivision. What we ended up doing is representing Seligman with a passing siding on the reversing loop at the very top. So there's a lot of compromise, but that's what you've got to do. There's only so much space you've got, so you utilise what you can and fit in what you can without it being overcrowded.
It must have been a lot of fun just getting the boys involved with all of this as well, and just going through it, laying this all out with them and spending that time. It's got to be just precious moments for you.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And, we sat there for hours and hours going through all this and working everything out. And Daniel, like me, loves the passenger trains, so it was also important for him to have decent runs that we could put our scale passenger trains in. When I say scale passenger trains, we run full-length Super Chiefs with 16 cars. So when you're looking at the size of that train with 4 F units up front or a set of 3 PAs, that length of train is quite considerable. And we also wanted to represent reasonable-sized mainline freight trains. So the layout had to be designed to cater for all of that, as well as being able to cater for switching, pulling into yards, and having everything fit. So that was a bit of a challenge. Then, as I said, he enjoyed the scenery. His computer knowledge is a bit like his dad, and we sat there and worked out how to get backdrops working, and that's where we made some changes on the layout as well. Instead of mounting the backdrops on the front of the post, we put it on the back, which in hindsight doesn't look fantastic, but it gave me that little bit of extra space to fit things in. And one of the things that Ben and I sat there figuring out was scaling the backdrops so that the buildings in the foreground of the backdrop were roughly in HO scale. So when we put our building fascias that we had made, they fitted spot on onto the backdrops. So that was something that took a little bit of time and effort, but was definitely worth doing.
And speaking of, I know you've scratch built and kit bashed many of your structures. Talk about the necessity for that.
Yes, the majority of the buildings on the entire layout are actually scratch built or kit bash. And the reason for that is that no manufacturer actually makes anything close. And I guess that was part of the challenge that people like Chuck and Gary Hoover, who are also Santa Fe modelers, had, is that there wasn't anything representing the Santa Fe, particularly in the Arizona area. One of the biggest projects, which you can see in the background here, is the Kingman station. And it was quite unique. Walthers had a building that sort of had some shape to it, but really didn't come close. I thought, okay, what are we going to do? So I wrote off to the Santa Fe Modelling and Historical Society. Those guys have been fantastic, by the way. They sent me plans for this station, the original plans from the architect. And from that, I scaled it into HO and made the fascias. And this particular building, over a long period of time, finally came together. And I did use some bits and bobs from Walthers kits. Windows in particular were great because it gave you the right sizes of windows and doors and so on. But I then had to come up with ideas of how am I going to get the shapes of into the top of that building. It's got all these curves, it's got angles, all of that had to be hand cut and file finished. Then you had things like the stucco effect on the building. How are you going to do that? So yeah, that was fun. I used sifted ripper sand and glued that on. and then painted over the top of it. But I found that if I spray painted, what would happen is the sand would absorb too much of the paint. So I ended up brush painting it with house paint, and
Oh,
that
wow.
come up quite well. Yeah,
Oh,
so
fascinating. Yeah, to find different ways to model and do that. And
yes.
going back to, the Santa Fe Historical and Modeling Society that you tapped into and became a member of. And I think those historical societies are such an underutilized resource for modeling. There's so many of them, and even historical societies that aren't railroad will still cover a lot of bit of railroad. Railroad is a big part of history,
Oh,
and being
absolutely.
able to go back and do that. And it seems like, I mean, this was a critical lifeline for you for getting information on a railroad that for you is tens of thousands of miles away. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
long, as I can attest, it's a long way away. So
Yes. Yes. The Santa Fe Modelling and Historical Society is one of many that I've used. They are a fantastic organisation. I recommend it to anybody that models the Santa Fe. But I also went and subscribed to different libraries in Arizona, the Powerhouse Museum in Kingman, the Mojave Museum. They have been very helpful in sending me photographs of different buildings and so forth. Research is probably the biggest thing with building a layout like this. What I also wanted to achieve, of course, was the layout to be quite prototypical. How do you get it prototypical? Well, you need to see what the prototype photos from the day what the place looked like, you know. And that didn't just mean the locomotives and the cars running on the layout, but the structures and the what did the place look like? What did the ground look like? What sort of contours did we have in and around the track? How was the condition of the track? What did it look like was it wooden sleepers, concrete sleepers? Was it segmented track? Was it welded rail, etc.? You find all this out from studying it and researching. And I've got to say, those historical societies and museums and libraries have been incredibly helpful. And over this build of this layout, I've gathered tens of thousands of photographs of the area to sift through to model it as closely to the prototype as we could. And in particular, with my model of the city of Kingman, what also helped there was the Sanborn maps, which are, from what I understand, are a type of insurance map that used to be around in the early 20th century. And that gave you detail of where the roads were, what the railway track looked like, where it was, what buildings were what, and approximate sizes of buildings as well. So from that, I could then expand out and ask the different historical societies. I believe there was this oil company that existed on Route 66 on this side of Kingman. Would you happen to have any photographs of that? And they'd come back with what they had, and it was terrific.
wow, yeah,
Yeah.
that's huge, especially for, again, you're modeling an era from a while, long while ago.
Oh, yes.
And then, trying to get all that information. Do you find the research process almost or equally enjoyable to the modeling itself?
Absolutely. That is part of the fun. The research and finding different clues of how to improve the layout, that's I'd say half the fun of the whole thing. Because the end result of all that research is the ability to produce a model that's pretty close to the prototype, which is what you want as your end result. I've always enjoyed the research I did back in high school, history, and modern history was my thing. And totally enjoyed going back in time, learning about all these different things. And the history of the Santa Fe Railroad has I guess, been a sub hobby of model railroading for me.
I know that you are big on the details, big on drilling in. What do you consider close enough?
Well, I guess with a layout the size of what we had, that one of the bigger things was compromise. And I had to fit in my mind, I wanted to fit in a fairly large area of prototypical layout, but then I had to compromise and cut things out to be able to do the next prototypical scene. So I concentrated on the towns of Kingman and Hackberry in particular, and I wanted 3 or 4 blocks of Kingman so that when people saw that, they think, "Wow, we've just gone back in time into a place that I visited when I was a kid." And you hear these comments all the time from people that see the layout. "Oh, we passed through there on our way to the Grand Canyon. I remember that building," you know. And that's what I wanted to achieve, is that it could be recognized. And when it comes to detail, I get pretty fanatical about detail, particularly with key buildings. So the station, for example, I would say that's probably around 90% accurate on the prototype. The backdrops, of course, are photographs of the real place. And the track design is actually taken from the Sanborn maps. So the track design is quite accurate, albeit condensed to fit into the scene. Buildings like the Powerhouse Museum are quite accurate, and also the background buildings. I went to a lot of trouble to get those fascias to look as accurate as I possibly could, so people would recognise Route 66, the famous Beale and Brunswick hotels, the garage, and so on. So I looked at those key structures in the towns to try and get those as accurate as I could. The same with the depot in Hackberry and the depot in Yucca. They're almost spot on based on the photographs and the details that I got from the Historical Society.
How are you using those to translate? What are some of those steps that you're taking to take that photo that you have and then create the model? What are the things that you're looking for in them?
Right. So when I get some raw research come in from the Society, when it came to, let's say, Yucca Depot, I had a couple of photographs from their magazine to look at, of which were both colour and black and white. I had some measurements they sent me, and measurements of extensions that were added onto the building as well. I had some HO scale Santa Fe windows and doors for different depots to work with. I then scaled the photograph on the computer, and after many printouts, based it on window and door sizes to getting an approximation of the size of the wall on that particular building to get it as close to scale as I could, and then use the outside measurements that I also had given to me to get that as close as I possibly could. To build the buildings, in the case of Yucca Depot, that's made out of evergreen styrene, plastic, and balsa wood. And things like clapboard, if it wasn't quite right, then it had to be hand scored and done manually to get everything right. So in the case of Yucca, the number of pieces of clapboard matches with the number of pieces of clapboard on the prototype building.
That's pretty dialed in. That's pretty dialed in, John.
Yes. Yeah. So, and I guess the challenge was that I got quite interested in the NMRA Achievement Program, and the first one that I ended up achieving was prototype, and based on models like Yucca, the Kingman Station, Hackberry Station, and so on.
Now, let's talk a bit about that. You just recently became a master model railroader. Congratulations to you on that. What did that achievement mean to you?
Look, it proved that I could actually do the work. that the whole idea for me of achieving or completing the achievement program was to challenge myself, to build different types of structures, to build different types of cars, to manage how to do the electricals and electronics, to actually produce a prototypical scene, and basically, try and push myself into that next level of modelling.
Which AP certificate challenged you the most?
I actually think probably the first one, which was prototype. Doing the prototype scene, that was quite a challenge because there was a lot that had to be built. So it wasn't just Kingman Station, which is the scene that I decided on. I picked a 1954 scene of an F unit pulling in a set of reefers, having a work train on one side, but you had to notice all of that detail in that photograph and try and reproduce that. So it wasn't just the station, it was what else is around that station. What did the platform look like? What did the track look like? What the ballast? What colour was the rail? Adding things like little retaining walls and baggage carts. Then looking at the different cars that were on the photograph and finding those cars and what I didn't have, kit bashing them to make them work. How to make the backdrop as close as I could as well, because at that stage I actually didn't have a backdrop on the layout, so I very quickly learned, with a bit of help from my younger son Ben, what to do with things like a blue sheet and a projector and produce a background. The other thing were things like trees, telegraph poles, getting all those right. And I did quite a bit of research just on the telegraph poles and the electrical poles, what they look like, and making them realistic. All of those on the layout are all handmade. So the end result was pretty close, I think, and it gave us both a lot of satisfaction to have produced that and get it as close as we could to that prototype photo.
It sounds like you going into it, you already had a really a keen eye for detail, but this really kind of added to that and really helped you hone that skill, didn't it?
Oh, it did. It certainly did. Yes.
For someone who is intimidated by the NMRA Achievement Program, and I know there are quite a few who look at it as this, all the time and energy it takes to do it. For somebody who has that level of intimidation, what would be some words of encouragement for them?
I think when it comes to the AP, don't think that it's not achievable. It certainly is, and you are a better modeler than you think. Don't put yourself down. Look at what other modelers do. Ask questions. Find out how they did it. In particular, for me, I looked at modelers like Gary Rumming, what he's done with his card models, how he's produced that. I look at a lot of David North's modelling, a lot of Justin Mitchell's modelling, and I've learned a hell of a lot from all of that. I also look at what research I've done in magazines. Again, research to produce these and achieve your APs is I think, a major part of earning the AP as well. Look at how people in magazines have done things and see if you can either replicate or improve upon those. Don't think you're not capable, because you are. Everyone's capable of something. Whether your niche is electrical or whether it's scenery or whether it's your eye for detail in rolling stock or locomotives, look at that first. Once you've achieved that, then move to the next step. Challenge yourself. And it's the challenge is what it's all about.
That's some solid advice. At the Sydney RPM, I spent a lot of time up on that stage talking to a lot of folks, and unfortunately, I didn't get a chance to go around and see everything. Tell me what I missed. Tell me about what you brought to the Sydney RPM and what you were able to share with folks.
Right. I brought 7 Santa Fe steam locomotives that I tried to detail outside the square, I guess, from what the regular detailer would do. I wanted to show people this is what you could do if you went all out on a locomotive and super detailed it. So when it came to, we were talking about 3751 before, let's bring her back into the picture again. What did I do to improve that? I added things like the electrical harnesses for the headlights, different valves that I noticed that were on the prototype that were missing from the model. So I made those valves and hoses and so forth. Detail in the interior, what was right, what wasn't. I again researched all of that, and I must admit I did go to the nth degree inside the interior, painting even the gauges and the needles on them, and lighting it all up and putting firebox flickers. But exterior detail, other than the lighting harness, you look at, okay, that bell doesn't look quite right. What's wrong with that? What do we do to make that right? So the bell needed a lever, and of course your bell cord was missing, so that was added in, and then of course that meant adding all the stanchions for the bell cord in place as well. And then when it comes into the cab, it needed to be looped off the ceiling of the cab, and it had to be painted the correct colour. So that was all added. The whistle cord was not on the original model, so that was added on again with the stanchions for that. Then you had your air hoses, and I noticed on the back of the locomotive that it was missing the uncoupler details, so that was all added on. And I made those all from scratch, just out of stainless steel wire, copper wire, and brass plate, and brass bolts that I turned down to make valves and things out of. Then you have a look at other details that were also either not quite right or could have been improved. And you think, oh, okay, on the front of the locomotive, we've got to mould it on a grab iron. Let's turn that into a real grab iron. So you scrape that off, add on the metal grab iron instead. Scale couplers. Then you've got your, in the case of 3751, I did have an engineer and a fireman, but with a lot of the other locomotives, there was nothing like that. So you add all that detail in. Look at the trucks, what detail can be added to the trucks. Look at the paint detail. Things like the inside of the bell should be red. So you paint the inside of the bell. In the case of 2926, that was a solid casting, so it had to be drilled out and a bell hammer put in. So yes, I did that.
Are you one that, I mean, we talk about all these amazing manufacturers now, both in steam and diesel,
Yes.
and the way technology has advanced far from when you first purchased that Bachmann locomotive to now. But even now, these factories can't do that, right? And mass production can't do all that. It sounds like you're one that you can understand that, and understand to get to that level that you're looking for means you've got to be a modeler.
Absolutely.
Right? You've got to be able to take the where they get it to about 75, 80% or so, and then you can take it from that 80 to the 99%, right?
That's right. Well, the way I look at it is that to produce a model, the factory has to do it to a price. And if they don't do it to a price, they'll never be able to sell the model. The cost of adding all this extra detail would be phenomenal. So you work with what you've got. So back in the day, you were mentioning the Bachmann model just then, that 2926 started life as just a cheap Bachmann Northern. And I looked at that and thought, how do I turn that into something? So you can turn a $150 locomotive into something quite extraordinary if you do the research and have a look at how you can make the different parts and add those parts on to make it really look something.
Word has it that there is a version 3 coming of your first Arizona sub, a little bit of change in movement. Why don't you give us a little bit of summary of what's ahead for you in your modeling journey?
Yes, my good friend Gary Rose and I have been working on this. It's at the drawing stage. So my wife and I have decided that it's time to move on from our home in the mountains here. It's getting a little bit much to maintain with the size of the property, and at our age, constantly traipsing up and down stairs. We'd like something that's single level, and we've come up with a design for a home that has a triple garage for a layout, as you do, And the compromise, of course, is that my wife has a butler's pantry off the kitchen.
Nice.
So with that triple garage, Gary and I worked out the dimensions and are currently working on a new layout, which will be in that future property over the next 18 months or so. I think we've learned a heck of a lot over the last two versions of the first Arizona Sub. One of the biggest problems I have with the current layout is because you live in the mountains, you're quite high up. We're about 600 meters up here. And when you're dealing with that height, you're also dealing with moisture in the air. And quite often you wake up and look out the window and you're in the clouds, and when you see that moisture and what it does to your layout with shrinkage and expansion, that's a drama.
Right.
So we've looked at all of that and what it's done to the layout and how we've had to combat it and so on to use that experience into the new layout so that we don't have these issues in the future.
It'll certainly be fascinating to see version 3 as you put that all together, and we will follow along with that. We'll share links and images related to all of the things that we talked about on this episode on our website, aroundthelayout.com/242. John, you've had quite a model railroading journey from a wooden train your grandfather built to becoming an NMR, and then now you're planning version 3. Tell me, what has this hobby given you?
Gee, give me a question here. Look, I think the hobby's given me a heck of a lot, to be honest. It's expanded my knowledge tenfold. We've built, when I say we, not just me, but my sons and I have built a lot of new friendships through the NMRA. Our research has taught us a heck of a lot. It's grown our minds into just going from people that just run trains around in circles to proper operations. I think the hobby's a fabulous way of being able to unwind. You come home from some pretty stressful days in my job, and some of the best things you can do is sit down, do some research, sit down and do some modelling. Just pass that time. One of the things that I really enjoy is that my wife and I have a study in this place we're in at the moment. I think she studies me actually, and so she'll be at one side studying her psychology, and I'm doing modelling on the other side. And it's nice to have that quiet time together as well.
The hobby certainly delivers a lot. You've gotten a lot out of it. Again, the family connection, the work that you've been able to do with your boys and share that with them, plus the time with your spouse and being able to meet great people like David North and then spend time with a bunch of great folks at the Sydney RPM. I'm certainly glad I got to meet you in person at the Sydney RPM, and glad that we were able to catch up here and allow you to share your story here on Around the Layout. John, thank you so much for coming by. And we'll have you back on soon. We'll hear about the change from version 2 to version 3.
Thank you very much, Ray.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. Learn more about today's episode, check out past shows, and much more on our website, aroundthelayout.com. Show your support by becoming an operating crew member at aroundthelayout.com/crew. Follow us on social media, aroundthelayout.com/social. And send us your feedback, aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks for hanging out with us around the layout.